Hi, my name is Peter Thomas, President of Resource Compliance. This short video will dive into the details of IIAR Standard 9 by taking a close look at chapters 1 through 6. Before looking at the details in Standard 9, let me provide a bit of context. First of all, the title of the document is Standard for the Minimum System Safety Requirements for Existing Closed-Circuit Ammonia Refrigeration Systems. The 9 in Standard 9 is an indicator that it is IIAR's 9th published ammonia refrigeration standard. Standard 9 contains 8 normative chapters and 6 appendices. The primary purpose of Standard 9 is to establish minimum system safety requirements that must be adhered to by all systems regardless of the system age. The minimum requirements are spelled out in Chapter 7. Additionally, Chapter 8 outlines a methodology for evaluating systems against the minimum requirements in Chapter 7. We'll consider both of these chapters in detail in future trainings. In this video, we'll examine the content in chapters 1 through 6 and appendices B, C, and F. While that may appear to be a lot of information, you'll see shortly that these sections contain a relatively small amount of content. Chapter 1 establishes the purpose and scope of Standard 9. Section 1.1 succinctly states that the purpose of the document is to provide the minimum safety requirements for existing closed-circuit ammonia refrigeration systems. The key word in that sentence is existing. This standard is not applicable to the design or installation of new systems. Section 1.2.1 summarizes the scope of Standard 9 as providing a method to determine if existing systems comply with the minimum system safety requirements of the standard. Chapter 8 and Appendix E are wholly devoted to this subject of minimum system safety evaluations, so we'll table this topic for now and address it in a later training. Additionally, the scope of Standard 9 is to provide a method to determine and document that existing equipment designed and constructed in accordance with codes, standards, or practices that are no longer in general use is inspected, tested, maintained, and operated in a safe manner. In other words, IIAR 9 provides a method for our industry to demonstrate compliance with the process safety information requirement in the PSM, RMP, and CalARP regulations. Standard 9 is not applicable to equipment in non-industrial occupancies, such as low-charge systems that are now being used in the commercial sector. Additionally, this standard does not apply to ammonia absorption systems. Chapter 2 is titled Definitions and directs the reader to IIAR Standard 1, which is titled Definitions and Terminology Used in IIAR Standards. The only new definition introduced in Chapter 2 is Risk Ranking Method. But since that definition relates to minimum system safety evaluation methodology, we'll wait to examine it until Chapter 8. Chapter 3 lists the normative references that are part of Standard 9. The documents listed are the ASME Boiler and Pressure Vessel Code Section 8, OSHA's regulations relating to machine guarding, IIAR Standards 1, 2, 6, and 7, the International Safety Equipment Association Standard for Emergency Eyewash and Shower Equipment, and NFPA Standard 704, which explains the 4-quadrant placarding system for hazardous materials. Appendix F lists additional references that are informational. This slide displays the content included in Appendix F. Chapter 4 clarifies the minimum requirements for equipment and system documentation. The required documentation is divided into 3 categories: manufacturer data reports, materials of construction, and manufacturer documentation for system components. You probably noticed the asterisk in each of the 3 categories. Whenever you see an asterisk in this standard, it means that there is additional explanatory material regarding that section in Appendix A. This slide displays the explanatory material for Section 4.1.2 regarding materials of construction documentation. As you can see, the first paragraph explains what materials of construction documentation is and even provides a list of common types of materials of construction documents. The final paragraph has an interesting statement regarding Appendix C. It states that Appendix C provides a listing of additional equipment system component documentation that is not required by this standard to be obtained to demonstrate compliance. Appendix C is located near the end of the document and provides even more background material regarding documentation. The paragraph introducing Appendix C is intentional in clarifying that the appendix is not mandatory. This is true for all the appendices in Standard 9. The first sentence of the second paragraph explains that the purpose of Appendix C is to provide a listing of equipment documentation that is not required to comply with the standard, but may be beneficial in developing other regulatory documents. The appendix continues by providing a myriad of examples of such documents. In terms of PSM, each of these is an example of a process safety information document. We won't look at each item in this list, since the documents are not required to comply with Standard 9. Appendix B is titled Equipment System Component Documentation and serves a very similar purpose as Appendix C. Like Appendix C, Appendix B is merely informative. Appendix B uses a similar sentence as Appendix C to state that the purpose of the appendix is to list documents that are not mandatory to comply with Standard 9, but are required to demonstrate compliance with other regulatory requirements. Appendix C concludes by listing 10 documents which are required in the RMP, PSM, and CalARP regulations as part of process safety information. We'll conclude this training by surveying chapters 5 and 6, which happen to be one sentence each. Chapter 5 requires that equipment and system components be inspected, tested, and maintained in accordance with IIAR's ITM standard, Standard 6. An interesting nuance of this section is that 5.1 seemingly requires existing systems to comply with Standard 6 immediately, whereas Section 4.1.3 of Standard 6 states that the standard is voluntary until adopted by the authority having jurisdiction or when adopted by the owner, whichever comes first. We'll have to wait and see how this subtle difference plays out. Chapter 6 requires that existing systems develop operating procedures that comply with IIAR Standard 7. I trust you found this training on IIAR Standard 9, Chapters 1 through 6 helpful. I welcome any questions or comments that you might have. Feel free to reach out to me using the contact info on the screen. Thank you.